This isn't a normal life. What am I going to be like when I'm 80? Do I really want to live in this environment? Do I have to think about moving now?
With its rows of red terraced properties, there are, on the face of it, many streets like this across the country. But behind these doors lies another story. We've heard tales of drugs, disorder, violence, and even prostitution. And it stems from so-called supported exempt accommodation. It's supposed to give a home to society's most vulnerable people, among them women fleeing domestic violence, people with substance abuse issues, the homeless, and prison leavers seeking another opportunity at life. Funded handsomely from public money, the term exempt accommodation refers to properties that do not have to abide by housing benefit caps. It makes for a lucrative opportunity for providers with an eye on the bottom line, with some cashing in off the back of failing provision. And here, on this road in Birmingham, not more than 200 metres long, with fewer than 40 houses, we've been told that at least nearly a quarter are exempt accommodation. There's a lot of life on this street, light and dark. Here, residents tell their stories.
It's always been a mixed street. It was very diverse, very mixed, and that really suited us. But over time, as houses have come up for sale over the years, and we've gone from 4 or 5 exempt houses up to the current 9 or 10 EA.
Helena France is a 71-year-old retired teacher, the mother of one and widow whose husband died nearly 6 years ago, has become somewhat of a local champion, fighting for the community.
And this has been going on for, well, shortly after we moved in 1994. By 2010, it had just got so bad that I got involved in a residents' association, tried to work with councillors, that didn't work. And by 2018, via the Residents' Association, the police contacted me because we were one of 10 streets with the highest crime rate in the area.
It is a reality Batul Sheikh knows only too well. The 48-year-old foster carer who looks after 2 children can create a sanctuary within the walls of her own home, but outside is another matter.
It's pretty stressful knowing that a child has been taken from a situation because they're unsafe, whatever that situation is. And, they're put here and then they're potentially unsafe again. I'm here to protect them and to give them a very safe, nurturing, quiet environment. And I just feel like it's getting more and more difficult. There were just lots of incidences on the road, so police were being called all the time, and there were always ambulances in the road. There were people kind of who were either high or ODing on drugs. Some people were just like laying in the road and we had to phone the police to come and get them.
We had a young lad living in here for long and long enough, wouldn't wear shoes. He just walked up and down the street in his bare feet. Hadn't washed for a long time, and they need help. Well, there's only so much you can do.
And I would help them, like giving them a lift here and there. And sometimes they didn't have money for food, so I'd cook for them and my children would take it round.
One night, about 1 o'clock in the morning, there's a big hammering on my door. So I went downstairs. Somebody had kicked in the door of one of the houses across the road. They don't know where to turn to. They know I live here, so they came. Would I help them? And yes, I did. I said, I can't do anything now, it's the middle of the night, but I'll come across tomorrow morning. And then other silly things happened. I'd been sat in the car, prepared to go into town to meet my daughter. He knocked on the window and he just went, I know you're a lot older than me, but if ever you fancy a good shag, I only live across the road.
It's sexual harassment.
Yeah, it is. So we have to be very aware of who we're trying to help and how we're trying to help and what we're prepared to do.
Meanwhile, Hamida Musaji, a mother of 6, including a 10-year-old daughter who has special needs, has lived with her family on the road for 2 decades. But years of incidents have left the 46-year-old exhausted, numb to the chaos unfolding just yards from her doorstep.
There would be a lot of noise. Sometimes you'd have police cars coming into the night. You would have a lot of loud noises. It got to a point where, I mean, I've got a very large family. It got to a point where, honestly, I would just ignore and avoid it. We had problems with rodents because they would just leave the rubbish outside. Every week it was piling up. It's not very nice.
And we have small front gardens, and they light fires, and they cook and drink and take drugs outside. So instead of walking one way down the road, I'd go all the way around, or I'd cross over and go that way. There was a lady who had nunchucks and some sort of machete that she was holding. She was running after a man who lived in one of the exempt properties here. One of my foster children, she really became quite excited by it. I was quite shocked at her reaction, actually. But because it's something that she kind of recognises from her past that's happened, she kind of wasn't scared of that situation at all, which is really concerning.
Retired teacher Mike lost his wife of 54 years during the pandemic. He misses her. But while the 79-year-old grieves, he has to put up with the street's problems.
It was only when we started getting the house used as supported housing that we began to have trouble. Arguments, rows, noise on the front of the house. A man came out of the house next door, walked around in front of my house and unzipped himself to urinate against the wall of my house.
His wife may be gone, but he is not alone. A community survives on the road.
We try and look after each other. We do look after each other. I mean, over last weekend, I had 2-3 phone calls asking me if I'd keep an eye on the house because they were away. People used to do the same for us.
Noticed some of the houses have cameras on the outside pointing outwards. It's quite something though, isn't it, for someone to feel like they have to film what's going on outside the house.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I don't want to do it. I know that. I think it's sad.
Sharon Thompson, Birmingham City Council Cabinet Member for Homes and Neighbourhoods, is calling for the government to act.
What we are coming across, not just in Birmingham but across the country, is that there are some providers that are not fulfilling their tasks. So what they're doing is they might be providing someone with a home, but they might not providing them with the care and support that they're supposed to be providing and that they're paid to support them with. And that has a huge effect on the individuals that are living in there and also the neighbourhood as well. And we've seen some really dire cases where it's been absolutely traumatic for people.
Angie Page, a neighbourhood outreach worker at the Mosley Community Development Trust in Birmingham, helps people living in exempt accommodation. It is a soapbox issue for her, and it's not hard to see why.
I think a lot of what I do is offer the support that I would hope that they were getting in their accommodation, but they're not. Support workers often don't have the experience to support very complex people. Properties have been advertised as women only, but then there's men living there as well. I took a lady to one of the supported accommodation providers a couple of years ago. So she'd been sleeping rough in a car. We went to the supported accommodation provider and they didn't even ask her name. They just offered her a room there and then. And the first night she was there, her room was broken into, so the door was kicked open. Luckily she wasn't there, but her things were stolen and then wouldn't go back there because she didn't feel safe. She said she was better off sleeping in the car. I hear numerous stories about people having their rooms broken into, having their food stolen, having their belongings stolen. You then get people taking drugs or drug dealers come into those properties at all times to get new customers. Sometimes the support workers are either providing drugs for people in the service or that they're there doing drugs with people in the service. Very few examples that I could give where the support is good. Maybe people feel that the homelessness issue is being addressed, but it absolutely isn't.
And while there is a clear-cut need to house society's most vulnerable, there is a sense that this street bears too heavy a burden.
Why can't I have a balance? I don't want everybody to go. When I look at these younger kids, I think you're the children I taught. You shouldn't be, not literally, but you shouldn't be in this situation. There should be a safety net to ensure that you don't get into this trap that takes you nowhere.
When you get to my age, you start to wonder about how safe you are. I'm still fairly mobile, but if I had to run away from someone, I wouldn't be able to go very fast. The house has been strengthened in that the doors are modern, they are reinforced, and there's triple locks.
So I'm quite keen, and I've been campaigning alongside others for a long time now to ask for reform in this area, because it blows my mind, and I think it's an absolute scandal that so much money is being pumped into exempt accommodation through housing benefit, and it's not fit for purpose. Every person living in exempt accommodation should have a good standard, and we shouldn't be seeing the adverse effects that we're seeing in local communities.
But when it came to how much was being paid out in housing benefit in Birmingham to rogue exempt accommodation providers, the local authority was initially reluctant to say.
Other local authorities have been able to provide figures showing how much has been paid in housing benefit to specific providers, and from that we've been able to determine which ones have notices or judgments against them, and we think there's a great deal of public interest in highlighting that. I've asked the question of Birmingham, and I haven't been given those figures. And from what you said, it doesn't sound like we're going to be given those figures.
Well, my understanding is that some of the providers don't just operate in Birmingham, so there's issues around that. And again, the fact that some of these providers are exempt accommodation providers, but there are also non-exempt accommodation providers, so the figures are a global figure, and they don't give an accurate viewpoint if you're just looking but solely on exempt accommodation. So I've spoken to the housing benefit team. They're very clear with me where they stand in terms of the data. So if that point changes, then I'm happy to share that with you, but as it stands at the moment, we're not sharing our data at the moment.
The council did eventually release some figures, and when they arrived, it was little wonder why there was resistance. £555 million has been paid out in housing benefit in Birmingham to rogue providers in just 4 years. The total includes funds paid for both general needs housing as well as supported exempt accommodation to providers subject to judgments or notices by the regulator of social housing. The council did not provide a breakdown for what proportion each represents. But nonetheless, it offers a staggering insight into the amount of public money flowing into the hands of rogue exempt accommodation providers. In a statement, Birmingham City Council said that the amount paid out in housing benefit reflects the size of the sector in Birmingham and the rules and caveats under which we have to operate as a local authority. The rules around awarding housing benefit are separate from those of the regulator of social housing in terms of making payments to landlords on behalf of their tenants. A housing provider may be under investigation or sanction from the regulator, but whilst it remains a registered social landlord, housing benefit can continue to be awarded providing the tenant is entitled to benefit. Individual housing benefit claims are paid on behalf of the Department of Work and Pensions under housing benefit legislation. In most cases, the payments are made directly by the council to the landlord on behalf of the citizen. These cover housing-related costs only. The citizens are entitled to these payments through legislation. They are payments to individuals on low incomes in need of care and support, the landlord receiving the housing benefit on the tenant's behalf.
I spend a lot of my time either sad or angry about stuff, and I do think that the accommodation providers are doing it because they can. It's a huge business opportunity, and I don't feel that, having done this for a couple of years and seen as many people that I have, they can't all be lying about what their experiences are.
In March, Housing Minister Eddie Hughes set out plans to introduce minimum standards of support provided to residents, as well as changes to housing benefit regulations to seek to define care, support and supervision. He also unveiled the government's intention to hand local authorities in England new powers. But, he added, any measures requiring legislation will only be introduced when parliamentary time allows. The clock is ticking.
You just have to be aware there are 70 plus people down this street who have drug, alcohol, mental health, ex-criminals. and they're lost, most of them, and they need help. They need friendship, but there's only so much friendship you can give when there's just such large numbers.
Whereas before you'd be excited that it's going to be a lovely hot day, you kind of dread it. You know, I quite like it when it rains because it means there's nobody out in the street, either lighting fires or taking drugs or fighting.
My children are still growing. I've got a child with special needs. She's quite vulnerable, and to have that and not to feel safe, it obviously sort of, the problem becomes larger. It's not something you can ignore.
The one thing that you've really got to try not to drop into is just despair. What's the point? Let's go and live in the back of the house and not listen to all this